Let us talk now, though, to Peter Williams, Director of the Family Education Trust, because the assisted dying bill has been back in the news this week. People have been talking about how it's going to be taken through Parliament, how soon it's going to be enacted, whether or not it's going to be difficult, whether or not it's going to be a little bit too glibly presented. Certainly there have been some criticisms of those who are advocating for it. Let's find out what Peter has to say. Peter, very good morning to you.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Not at all. It's a very contentious issue, this still, isn't it? I mean, despite the fact that it seemed to pass without too much complaint and too much opposition in Parliament, the first initial reading, there's still an awful lot of argument going on sort of behind the scenes. Where are we with this exactly?
Well, I don't know. I think it went through a lot of arguments in the first stage, but in any case, it's a lot of arguments going on right now at committee stage. And some of the most disturbing stuff I think that we are hearing from day one, at the very least, was Dr. Rachel Clark, palliative care consultant, and also the chief executive of the Royal College of Nursing, pointing out that a deficit in palliative care could lead people to actually opt for assisted suicide because they don't want pain any longer. Not because palliative care isn't effective, because palliative care isn't extensive enough within our system, such that we can avoid people being subject to a postcode lottery. I mean, Rachel Clark particularly pointed to there being whole weekends at the hospital where she works and nights where there isn't a single palliative care specialist available to the people who are suffering. If in that context, you're not going to have people opting for assisted suicide out of a choice or autonomy. They're going to be doing it because they're in pain. That's not what we want. That's exactly the opposite of what we want. It's not a system that's going to be working for the vulnerable, for the terminally ill, for anybody else who would be affected by this. Rather, it be something which would be forcing people into an early death, and that would be really appalling. And of course, we also heard the idea that the High Court, which is supposed to be the one governing this, well, if we're going to give it to the judges, 3/4 of them would be dealing with this non-stop all the time. So anything else that the High Court deals with would be pushed aside. So this is not a workable system, very clearly. And so I think that we are learning a lot more about just how very disturbing this proposed system is.
So as the bill sort of has its passage through Parliament, then would you expect it to be more refined as time goes on, or would you prefer it to be rejected out of hand and kind of rewritten? What's likely to happen, do you think?
Well, I'm hoping that they do obviously reject it eventually. I think it's quite a dangerous bill. But in the meantime, whether there would actually be any amendments to mollify the worst aspects of this bill isn't entirely clear. I mean, they are mulling over the idea of strengthening doctors' rights, which is a very good idea. They're mulling over whether or not to ban doctors for introducing the subject to patients, which would also be a good idea, and strengthening language on maybe psychiatric assessment, simply an assessment by two doctors just on its own. But even then, the dangers of this bill would still remain. And those are only potential amendments. They're not necessarily going to come through. I think that a lot of the people who are in favour of this bill are lionising the idea of autonomy and choice over protections for the vulnerable. And so it's going to be interesting to see where MPs finally land on this, whether they really think that is a justifiable thing to introduce to UK law and medicine as things stand, given the medical sector as it currently is and the legal sector as it currently is. And for that reason, I hope that a lot of them would say, irrespective of what you think about the rights and wrongs of assisted suicide, this is not the time to do it.
No, because funnily enough, one of the things that's been a sort of side issue to this argument is after what happened in Southport and the dreadful scenes there and the recent court case and the imprisonment of the Southport killer, people have said to me, well, if we're going to have a vote on whether or not we should have assisted dying in this country, isn't it time to have a vote on whether we return to capital punishment? Because the two things perhaps go hand in hand, which is not something I suppose that anybody who was talking about assisted dying would have ever expected to be an issue.
Well, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? That the whole ethic of whether we can take human lives has come up. Now, as it happens, on a personal level, speaking entirely personally, I'm in favour of the death penalty. But that's partly because I do think that when you have something like a forensic investigation followed by a court process, there are meaningful protections in place to make sure, particularly with modern technology, that we don't have people who are innocent being found guilty. When it comes to assisted suicide, all you have at the moment is the fig leaf of a process in which you have two doctors interviewing a patient, and within this bill it would be within 21 days. How anyone could know a patient reasonably enough to know whether they're under pressure within 21 days is beyond me. But in any case, that's what's planned. And that's what would lead you to some kind of confidence this person is not under undue pressure, either by their relatives or by their doctors, maybe nurses who are trying to free up a bed, anything like that. Really, I mean, that really, if we are going to go with assisted suicide, despite the fact that that's the process involved, but not have the death penalty, when actually we would have a forensic process, that would be ridiculous. So I think it makes total sense to be in favour of the death penalty and against assisted suicide. I don't think it makes any sense to be in favour of assisted suicide, but against the death penalty.
Right. So what's the next step, if you like? What's the next stage of the bill's passage? What happens now?
Well, it's going to go through the final bits of it's committee investigation. This is not committee stage per se, this is committee investigation. And they will continue, hopefully, to talk to various different experts. There's been a lot of resistance about talking to, for example, disability rights experts and the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Now, they've U-turned on that. Yeah. Why they were opposed to it in the first place is somewhat suspicious, but in any case, they've now U-turned on that. So they'll hear from those. Hopefully, there will be more points come out that will inform the committee stage debate in Parliament. So that will probably be around, I would say, April, and then report stage very shortly after in third reading. Interesting enough, it's third reading when there will be a chance for the Commons to finally say no to this. I think if it gets to the Lords, there's very little, if any, chance that will happen. But all they need really is 28 MPs to switch sides and say, actually, I supported this and I wanted to hear the debate, but I actually think this is a really bad idea. David Davis was one of those people who said he thought that they need 5 days of debate within Parliament in government time. He's definitely not going to get that, so I think by definition should vote against it. But once you've got that, that discernment by MPs, I'm hoping that maybe some of the 40 MPs who didn't bother voting at all might come over and say, no, this really is a very, very bad idea. But that's what will happen at third reading. If it gets past third reading, it'll go to the House of Lords. There may be some amendments proposed there. But ultimately, I think once it gets to that stage, I think it's probably almost certainly going to go through.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Williams there, Director of the Family Education Trust, talking about the likelihood that this bill will indeed go through. Will it remain in the form that it is? Will it change in some way, shape or form through the process? And is it the right thing to do? An awful lot of people have got very strong opinions on this. You know, I've said before, I think that, you know, the assisted dying bill is quite a difficult kind of, you know, thing to juggle when you think about whether or not you want to give people the right to be able to help their relatives or help their loved ones to actually lose their lives and kill themselves. It's a very, very difficult one to be absolutely sure about. And it's one of those things that for many people, including me, it's a bit of a quandary. You're not absolutely sure. I'm not sure whether we should make a law about it. I'm not sure it's the right thing to do.